Well, I want to fill you in on Dickens' life and bring you up to the beginnings of the Pickwick Papers and give you a quick overview of the novel as well. And I want to start with Dickens' parents. His father, John Dickens, grew up in Cheshire. His parents were in service. That means they were servants. His father was a butler, his mother was a maid. And so the family was pretty humble. I thought I had my phone turned off. I'll call you later.
Uh-oh.
You know, somehow it dialed. A mystery.
They're all mysteries.
The Crew family were wealthy landowners until the Industrial Revolution. Wealth in England was in land. They had a magnificent country home. I'll show you a picture of it in a moment. They had a home in London. They lived very well. They had a highly influential circle of friends. Friends of the family were people like Sheridan, the playwright, Sir Joshua Reynolds, and Sir Thomas Lawrence, the artist. Their circle of friends was people who were wealthy. And this is the world that John Dickens grew up in, and that's important because he saw people living a very luxurious lifestyle, and he liked the idea of it, and consequently, all of his life he lived beyond his means, and that had profound influence on his son, Charles. He got an appointment through a family friend of the Crews, George Canning, who later in the century became prime minister. That's like our president. John was appointed to a government job with the Royal Navy. He was in the pay office, and so when he was 19, he began that career. Here's Crew Hall up there on the left, as it appeared in this etching sometime in the 1700s, and here it is today. You can see some wings have been added, and it's a hotel today. That first picture you saw, I didn't mention, made him look like he had a stomach ache. Here's some nicer pictures of John. While he was working in the Navy pay office, he met Tom Barrow, a fellow worker in the office, and got to know Tom's sister, Elizabeth Barrow. The two fell in love. John was transferred, he started up here in London, in Somerset House, which was a government building at the time. In 1804, he was there 3 years, and that's when he met Elizabeth. Then he was transferred down here, and there they started their family. They got married in 1809. Charles Dickens was born in 1812, and they lived there and then were transferred back to London for a couple of years, and then out here to Chatham, which is kind of a twin city with Rochester. And Charles Dickens had 5 years, very formative years there. In 1822, because of government reforms, the military budget was slashed. John Dickens' job was eliminated, and consequently his income plummeted. He moved the family back to London And he had a lot of trouble there because of the cut in his income. He borrowed money to live on. He seemed not to understand that when you sign a promissory note, that's not the end of it. You have to pay that loan back. And consequently, in 1824, he was put into a debtor's prison. By the way, here's Charles. This portrait is in his mid-teens. I think he was about 16 there. Very nice-looking young man. John Dickens, because he could not pay his debts, was put into something that was called the debtor's prison. There were several in London. He was put in this one, the Marshalsea prison. He was there less than a year. And by the way, it doesn't make sense to us today. If I owe you some money and I don't have it and I can't pay you, if you put me in jail, I can't work and make money. But I think partly the idea was, well, to pay your debts is a legal obligation, and if you don't do that, you have broken the law, and when you break the law, you're punished. But also, debtors sometimes would flee to the continent. They would go over to France or Italy to avoid their creditors. The Marshalsea is gone now. All that's left is a wall. Here's a part of it with a plaque stating that John Dickens was there. Just before John was put into prison, Charles, being now 12, was put out to work. Kid's 12 years old. It's time for him to go out and start earning a living. And he was put into a factory in London. It was called Warren's Blacking Factory, a place that made black shoe polish. And he had a very menial job. And this looked like the end of the line. It looked like, to young Charles, it looked like this is hopeless. There's nothing more other than to be a drudge for the rest of his life. Naturally, Charles hated this, and it was absolutely traumatic to him. For the rest of his life, he never could have enough money. No matter how much money he was making, he felt insecure because he did not want to end up like his family ended up. And there was a curious thing about the debtor's prison. Elizabeth and the children, I think there were 4 at that time, moved into the prison with John. He had a room and they all lived in that room. Charles would come from his work on weekends and visit with them. Here's a painting from the time of Warren's Blacking Factory. And at that time, the River Thames ran right up to the Strand, that prominent street today. Of course, that's why it has its name. But when you go today, you'll see that the Thames is, several hundred yards off because the land has been filled in. But this factory was infested with rats. It was just a horrible place to work for young Charles. Let me get us oriented here in this map of London. Right here is the Marshalsea prison. The next time you're in London, just walk across the London Bridge down the Borough High Street, and you'll see the site of where the Marshalsea was. It's about 3 streets along, right along where you come to that wonderful old inn, the George, which is almost on the side of where Chaucer's tabard was. Warren's Blacking Factory was right here at close to Waterloo Bridge. Now the family had, when they moved back to London, they lived up here in Camden Town. It's not quite on the map. When John was put in the prison, Charles had to walk every day from Camden Town, 4 miles into his job, and then on weekends when he came to see his family, he had to walk some additional miles. It was a hard life for Charles at this time. Dickens had not much formal education. When he was a child, his mother taught him to read. She taught him the basic elements of Latin. And he said that learning the Latin from her instilled in him a love of learning, a desire, a hunger to learn. When he was out in Chatham for about 3 years, before that, he was sent to something called a dame school. You may remember in Great Expectations, Pip is sent to one of these dame schools. He says we paid a penny a week for the privilege of watching this old lady every Tuesday evening or whatever, watching her fall asleep. No education took place there for Pip, except what Biddy taught him. But he was briefly in a dame school, and then after John got out of prison, he got out, by the way, because his mother died, and she left him a legacy of £450, enough for him to pay it was a baker that he owed the money to, enough for him to pay that and to get the family set up again. He started a second profession as a journalist, as a reporter. So when he was released from prison, then John put Dickens into what I think was a very good school. It was called Wellington House Academy for 3 years. And then when Charles was 15, it was time to go out into the world, and so he became a law clerk for 2 different firms for 2 years, long enough for him to develop a thorough hatred of the law and of lawyers. As you go through his novels, almost any time you run across a lawyer, the lawyers are wrecked. While he was working in the law firms, he picked up a book on a second-hand bookshop. It was this. It's a book of shorthand, brachography. It's usually referred to as Gurney's shorthand. People who know anything about shorthand, have looked into Gurney's system, tell us that it is extremely difficult. But without any assistance, Dickens sat down with this book and he taught himself to be a shorthand reporter. He knew that there was employment, and here's a specimen of his writing. And so he worked as a parliamentary reporter. The magazines, I guess newspapers, were just beginning to carry detailed reports of what was going on in Parliament. And so there was a demand for these, stenographers, aren't they? Dickens would go to the debates, and his job was to copy down every word that was said in the parliamentary debates. He was good at it, so good that, he was better, he was faster, he was more accurate than any of the veteran parliamentary reporters. For 3 years, he worked as a freelance. I guess today we'd call him an independent contractor. And then he joined the staff of a new magazine called The Mirror of Parliament. And all he did was copy every word of the debates and then transcribe it and hand it over to the compositor who would send it in print, and it would go into the magazine. Then in 1834, I guess because of the connection that he had with his father's employment, John was working at the time as a reporter. Dickens became, for 2 years, a reporter for a newspaper called the Morning Chronicle. And he had begun some creative writing by this time. In fact, he started the year before, in 1833, writing little vignettes. They're not short stories. Some of them have a sort of a plot, and some of them are simply descriptions of places or descriptions of people. He called them sketches. And he was able to sell them to newspapers and magazines. And then by 1836, he had enough of them to put together. He published them as a volume, and he used the pseudonym he had used when he was publishing them in the newspapers and magazines. Sketches by Boz. This is 1836. Dickens talks very fondly in the introduction to Sketches by Boz about that first night that he timorously slipped a manuscript into the editor's slot of the monthly magazine, and so I think this is probably Cruikshank, yes. Cruikshank, the artist, who was a very well-known artist, did some illustrations for Sketches by Boz, and Cruikshank put himself and Dickens up here in the hot air balloon with their ascent. So that brings us up now to the beginning of Pickwick. How did it all get started? Well, it began with this artist, Robert Seymour. Seymour was a popular, well-known illustrator. He had illustrated a good many books and was consequently well-known. And he had a publishing project in mind. And he approached a publishing firm, a startup, Chapman and Hall. His idea was this. He said, I'd like to make some etchings of some Cockney sportsmen, or Cockneys who fancy themselves sportsmen, but they're so inept that they're constantly getting into difficulties, and it would all be hilariously funny. And the publishers thought, well, this sounds like it might work, might sell. But they said, now, we're going to charge a shilling for each of these. There would be these 4 etchings every month. We're going to charge a shilling. We need to give the reader something else, the customers, something in addition, like a little story to go along with it, a story related to the etchings. And so they looked around. They needed a hack. Somebody that they could get for not very much money. And I think it was Mr. Chapman. He had recently seen Sketches by Boz, and he said, well, let's find out who this is. So on February the 12th, 1836, a representative called at Dickens' rooms, presented this proposal to him, and Dickens jumped on it. Dickens, at this time, had recently gotten engaged, and he was looking to increase his income. So here's a way to make a little more money. And so he joined this team, but he said, that this is backward. You want Seymour to do these etchings, and then I'll somehow generate a story out of those. Let's do it this way. Let me write a story, and then Seymour can draw illustrations out of that. This was a little bit of a blow, I think, to the ego of Seymour, but it's what Chapman and Hall wanted to do. So the project got underway, and that's how the Pickwick Papers got started. Dickens was hired as a hack. The engagement was to Catherine Hogarth, a lovely young woman. Her father was a lawyer from Scotland, He had, in Scotland, had a prosperous practice. Sir Walter Scott, in fact, was one of his clients in Edinburgh. But George Hogarth's real love, and it's not related to the artist, George's real love was music. What he wanted to was to play. He wanted to write about music, be a music critic. And so he moved his family to London and got into the newspaper business. And by this time, in fact, was the editor of the Evening Chronicle, the sister paper that Dickens was working for. And consequently, he met George Hogarth's daughter. The two fell in love, they became engaged. And so in 1836, when the Pickwick Papers gets underway, the engagement is set. The publication date for the first installment of the Pickwick Papers was to be March 31st. The wedding was set for April 2nd. This is a really, really busy time. So the publication of the Pickwick Papers starts. And it's set up as a club, the posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club. Mr. Pickwick, right here in the middle, with a little bit more hair than I have, is the president, the founder and perpetual president of the Pickwick Club. And he has three associates, Mr. Winkle right here, who fancies himself a sportsman. And he turns out to be the only sportsman in the group. Tracy, Augustus Snodgrass here, who fancies himself a poet. I'm not sure he ever actually wrote any poetry. And then Tracy Tupman, the pudgy guy, who is a lover, a ladies' man. The Pickwick Papers opens, it's written as the minutes of the Pickwick Club, and it's kind of a parody of some of the learned societies of the time. In that opening chapter, in the minutes, Mr. Pickwick is proposing to the club that he and his three friends set out on an expedition to explore England and to send back reports to the Pickwick Club and pick up any sorts of curiosities. Well, the Pickwick Club agrees with the understanding that these four are going to pay all their own expenses. And this is kind of like the Royal Geographic Society in the 19th century, sending explorers out to find the origin of what is the river? The Nile, yeah. And then I put two other names in here, Samuel Weller, who becomes Mr. Pickwick's servant, and Sam's father, Tony Weller, who is a coachman. He drives coaches. The novel was set for, the project was set for 20 parts, one a month, 1 shilling each time, and Dickens would produce sometimes two, most of the time two, occasionally 3 chapters, and then the last number would be a culmination number, 19 and 20, and it would cost double price. It would be 2p instead of 1p. So here's Mr. Pickwick addressing the club. Mr. Blotton, this man down here looking disgruntled, in that opening chapter calls Mr. Pickwick a humbug. And there's some dissension in the club. And it's finally settled when Mr. Blotton says, well, actually he used the term humbug in its Pickwickian sense. In the first part, Mr. Pickwick is on his way to meet the other three, Winkle, Tupman, in Snodgrass to begin their expedition. He takes a cab to their appointed meeting place, and he's making idle conversation along the way. Now, he's looking for interesting information to send back to the club. So the cab, of course, is pulled by a horse. He asks the driver, how old is your horse? And the driver says, 42. 42? Horses have a long lifespan, but I don't think they ever lived to that. I mean, 25 or so. And so Mr. Pickwick is eagerly making notes. How long do you keep him out at a time in the harness? 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. You don't take him back to his stall at night? No, he'll fall down if we take him out. And Pickwick is naive, you know. He's trusting, and whatever he's told, he believes. So he's writing all this down. Well, they get to their destination, and Mr. Pickwick is ready to pay, and the cabman jumps out, and he's ready to fight. Put up your dukes. Pickwick is astonished. What's going on? The other cabmen gather around to fight. Hey. Well, this is an informer. An informer? Yes. Why were you writing down my cab number? Complete misunderstanding. This is just the typical kind of scrape that in the early part of the novel, well, a good ways through the novel, Mr. Pickwick keeps getting himself into. Mr. Pickwick and the Pickwickians are butts of jokes. And the purpose of the novel is to simply get them into uncomfortable, embarrassing situations. But that changes. They're rescued by this character, Alfred Jingle, who they don't know is a wandering actor, a vagabond, who has a peculiar manner of speech. Dickens called it telegraphic speech, or I guess somebody later did that. He doesn't use complete sentences. He uses words and phrases that make a kind of sense. Jingle gets them extricated from this, and the Pickwickians are very grateful. And they find out he's going the same way they're going. And so he joins their party, and he tells tall tales all the time. Now they're riding on top of a coach. They're leaving the inn yard where there's an arch, and he's telling them, watch your heads. Terrible place, dangerous work. Other day, 5 children, mother, tall lady, eating sandwiches, forgot the arch, crash, knock. Children look around, mother's head off, sandwich in her hand, no mouth to put it in, head of the family off. Shocking. Well, here's what he's talking about. This is the way a coach would look at the time. And there were different prices of seats. Up on top, you'd have the cheapest seats because you're out there in the weather. If it's raining, you get rained on or snowed on. In the winter, it's bitter cold, and so you wrap up in a tremendous greatcoat. It's dusty in the summer when the roads are dry. That's coach. Inside business and first class, where you pay more. Here is one of the old coaching inns. This is the Norfolk Arms in Arundel, one of our very favorite little towns in the world. Lovely place to have tea. And this is the way it looked in the 1700s when it was built. Now there's the archway. Oh, here was the floor plan of a typical inn, coaching inn. Rooms would be built in a quadrangle around here, and this center part would be open, and coaches and horses could be there at night, and they could close the gates so it would be secure. But you can see the arch is not very tall, and you very well might have to be careful as the coach goes out. Pickwickians find Alfred Jingle to be a really interesting person. he's interested to each of them in a different way. Pickwick is introducing the Pickwickians to him and says that Mr. Snodgrass is a poet. And Jingle says, well, so have I. Epic poem, 10,000 lines, Revolution of July, composed it on the spot in the battle. Mars by day, god of war, Apollo by night, god of poetry, banged the field piece, twanged the lyre. You were present at that glorious scene? Present, think I was. Fired a musket, fired with an idea, rushed into a wine shop, wrote it down, back again, wheels, bang, another idea, wine shop again, pen and ink, back again, cut and slash, double time. And of course, these are all tall tales. Jingle's making all that up, but like Samuel Pickwick, the other three are equally naive and trusting. He finds out that Mr. Winkle is a sportsman. He tells a story about this wonderful dog that he had. He was out hunting and he started into an enclosure and he turns around and the dog won't come. The dog's outside. And he says, come on, Ponto, come on. And so he goes back out and then he sees this sign. Notice the gamekeeper has orders to shoot dogs found in this enclosure. A dog that can read. and so for a while, Jingle is traveling with the Pickwickians. Their first stop on their rambles is out to Chatham, where Dickens spent part of his childhood. His father was stationed there because it was an important military base, and they arrived just in time for a military review where the soldiers are engaged in mock battle. They're in their lines the way warfare was conducted at the time. This that insane manner. We would all have our muskets and we would all walk toward the enemy, and they were walking toward us until we got within range, and then we'd open fire. And then we'd step back and the next rank would step in and they'd fire. Well, in this military review, of course, they don't have bullets in their guns. And the Pickwickians are watching, and this was all very exciting. I mean, here the troops, and suddenly they're getting closer and they're getting closer, and all the rest of the audience have withdrawn, and the Pickwickians are right in the middle of the battle. They stay at a hotel, and the Pickwickians enjoy a glass of wine, second glass of wine, third glass of wine. So it's evening, and they've gone off to bed, but Tupman, the lover, finds out that there is an assembly, a ball going on, and he would like to go. But he's hesitant to go by himself. And Jingle says, well, I'd be glad to go with you, but gee, I don't have my dress clothes with me. All my clothes have been sent by water in trunks, and all I've got is this paper bag. Well, all he owns in the world is in this paper bag. No problem, Tupman says. You're about Winkle's size. He's got his brand new Pickwick coat. So I'll just slip into his room and we'll borrow it and we'll go to the dance. Well, at the dance, Jingle takes a middle-aged widow away from this man, Dr. Slammer. And Dr. Slammer is furious, and so there's a confrontation. And Dr. Slammer wants satisfaction, and Jingle just thumbs his nose, and they go off to bed. The next morning, a lieutenant arrives and is conducted to Mr. Pickwick and says, one of the people traveling with you acted in a most ungentlemanly manner last night, and Dr. Slammer demands satisfaction, and I'm his second. He describes the clothing, and Pickwick says, well, that's Winkle. And so Winkle is awakened and presented with Dr. Slammer's card. Here's the time and the place for the duel. And poor Winkle is awakened from a deep sleep, and suddenly he's going to have to fight a duel. Winkle thinks and thinks about this, and he takes Snodgrass into his confidence. And he says, Snodgrass, do not let me be balked in this manner. Do not give information to the local authorities. Do not obtain the assistance of several peace officers to take either me or Doctor of the 97th Regiment, at present quartered in Chatham Barracks, into custody, and thus prevent this duel and possibly my death. I say do not. Well, the irony is totally lost on Snodgrass. Not for worlds, my friends. And so, at the appointed time, Mr. Winkle goes to the place. And he's a sportsman. He knows all about everything, guns, everything. Yeah. He doesn't know how to load a pistol. So it's loaded. It's loaded for him. And the two men, of course, they're opposite sides of the meadow, and so they approach, ready for the duel, and suddenly Dr. Slammer says, stop, this is not the man. And Winkle is asked, well, why were you going through with this? Well, I'm not quite sure why he was going through with it. He said, well, it's a matter of honor. And so, oh my goodness, his stock goes way up with the troops here. There are 9 stories inserted. I say inserted, there's a lot of debate about this. My view is they're inserted into the Pickwick papers, and they've come to be called interpolated tales. They're of 2 sorts. Sometimes somebody has given a manuscript to Mr. Pickwick that he reads late at night, and so it goes into the Pickwick papers, and they're short stories, tales. Sometimes it is a character who tells a story about something that has happened to him. And I want to mention only the first one, The Dying Clown. The narrator of this story says that he's been told that an acquaintance, an actor, clown means comic actor, is dying. And so he goes to see the man, and the poor man is hysterical. And he begs, please don't leave me alone. Why not? Because my wife is going to kill me. Why should she kill you? Because for years I've abused her, I've neglected her, and I know she's going to kill me. Well, you know, the poor man's demented. We know this is not going to happen, but the man is in a living agony. And it's an interesting story. It doesn't have anything to do with Pickwick tales. So, why are these in here? Well, a lot was going on in Dickens' life. He was getting ready to get married. He was setting up a household. He wrote a burletta, a comic opera, called The Strange Gentleman, that in fact was written and performed on the London stage. And he wrote an operetta, The Village Coquettes. He wrote and published a political tract, a satirical piece called Sunday Under Three Heads. He was very interested in politicians who were not serving the public. He was publishing the second volumes of the sketches. Late in 1836, he became editor of a new magazine. He was founding editor of a magazine called Bentley's Miscellany. And he was starting his second novel, Oliver Twist, in that magazine. So he was juggling all of this, two novels going at the same time. I think that there were times when the deadline was coming up for the current installment of the Pickwick papers, and he'd not finished it. And so I think sometimes he'd reach into a desk drawer. Well, here's this tale I wrote a long time ago, and we'll just stick it in here to fill Now, he was contracted to write 32 pages every month, and if you've done any serious writing, you know that's a big requirement. So I call them interpolated tales. Again, another day out of the military review, Mr. Pickwick's hat blows off, and he's chasing it, and it's a mildly comic scene. He gets almost up to the hat, and a gust of wind catches it. Well, we've all been there. It's not our hat, but it's the papers that have gotten away. It's almost in your reach, and it blows away. And the hat blows up to this carriage that belongs to a country squire, Mr. Wardle, and he's there with his family, his daughters Emily and Isabella, his mother, old Mrs. Wardle, who is selectively deaf, and his sister, a spinster lady, Miss Rachel, and he's served by this interesting character, Joe the fat boy. I think I've got a slide here. No, I don't. Okay. Joe is afflicted with a sleep disorder. It's not exactly narcolepsy, but it has its own name. But for decades in medical books, it was called the Pickwick syndrome. Yeah, for the portrayal of Joe, who just for no reason at all, suddenly he's nodding off. And the medical book, I wish Ed Thornton were here. Our doctor in residence. He says, according to the medical books, usually the person who suffers from this is obese, as Joe is. Well, Mr. Wardle invites the Pickwickians to his home. It's called Dingley Dell, and they're going to go. So the time comes for them to make the trip out from London to Dingley Dell. Mr. Pickwick rents, I think that carriage is called a chaise. It will hold only 3, and there are 4 of them. And so, well, Mr. Winkle is a sportsman. He knows all about horses, right? So he's going to accompany them on horseback. First of all, he tries to mount the horse from the right-hand side. And he drops his quirt, whatever you use with your horse. And Mr. Pickwick comes to pick it up, and Mr. Pickwick has his whip in his hand, and as he approaches, of course, the horse is shying away, and Mr. Winkle cannot get remounted. While all of this is going on, the horse pulling the little vehicle bolts, runs away, the vehicle tumbles, and let me see. Well, the other 2 Pickwickians are thrown out. They're dusty, but they're not really hurt. And so they make the rest of the journey on foot. And they're one of the saddle horse simply trots back to where it was rented. The draft horse pulling the chaise, they carry with them. They're trying to get rid of it. They'll stop at an inn, and nobody will take it because they're sure it's stolen. It's all embarrassing, humiliating for the Pickwickians. Well, there's a crisis. Robert Seymour finished two of the 4 illustrations for part 2. He'd had a nervous breakdown the year before. He was unhappy on a number of fronts. Went out to a shed behind his house and put a bullet through his head. So, what's going to happen? There was a meeting at Chapman and Hall. Seymour was the draw, and he's dead. It's time to jump the project. And Dickens apparently had just a tremendous presence, personality. And he said, no, let's go on, let's continue this. And so another artist is tried. His name is Buss. He does one installment, and he's not satisfactory. But they part amicably. And after Dickens died, Buss did this wonderful, famous painting. It's called Dickens' Dream. You can see it's unfinished. Dickens in his study, in his chair, with visions of characters from his novels filling the air. Oh, there is what the fat boy had. Okay, I was ahead of myself. Obesity, hypoventilation syndrome, it's now called, but for a long, long time it was the Pickwick syndrome. Well, Mr. Tupman is making progress with Miss Rachel, the old maid, and they thought Joe the fat boy was asleep, and he wasn't, and so there's a little bit of difficulty there. The Pickwickians have too much to drink, too much wine, and it was a salmon. It was the hummus. Then for part 4, a new artist is found. H.K. Brown. He took the pseudonym Fizz to blend with Boz, and this was a happy pairing. It could not have been happier. He was exactly the artist needed for a comic novel. He illustrated Dickens novels for the next 23 years. And his illustrations were just exactly right. Starting with part 4, something happened. We don't know exactly how many copies of the first 3 installments had been sold. A few hundred at most. And I assume that Chapman and Hall were breaking even, or they wouldn't have agreed to continue this a little bit more to see what happens. But it took off. I think partly because of the illustrations of Fizz, because they were just superb. Jingle shows up again. He elopes, or he's going to elope with Miss Rachel. They take off, and so Mr. Wardle and Pickwick and a lawyer go after him, after them, and they almost catch up. And the coach that Pickwick and Wardle are in overturns, and here's Jingle up here. He stopped to make sure they're okay, but says bye. Well, they figure out where Jingle and Miss Rachel are staying, and it's here that Mr. Pickwick meets Sam Weller. He's a bootblack at the inn. Every night at the inn, at a coaching inn, you put your shoes outside, and in the morning they would be there at your door, freshly polished. The bootblack would gather them up, polish them, and return them. Here's our introduction to Sam Weller. Sam, hello. Number 22 wants his boots. Well, ask number 22 whether he'll have them now or wait till he gets them. Sam is a Cockney, and the Cockneys in London have that peculiar speech characteristic of transposing V's and W's. Ask whether he'll have them now or wait till he gets them. Come, don't be a fool. The gentleman wants his boots. Well, Sam goes on to say, he's in line. He's got to wait his turn. Sam won't take any guff off of anybody. Well, Mr. Pickwick finds an amazing ancient artifact. It's a stone. I couldn't find a picture of the reproduction of the stone. There's one at the Dickens House Museum in London, but you can see this is a cigarette lighter that's been made. This is what the stone says. It has a cross here, and these letters that don't seem to say anything. And so this is, he asked the man who owns the cottage where the stone is in the ground. Is this stone old? Is it very old? Well, yeah. Oh gosh, it's really, really old, yeah. And so Pickwick buys it, and later he writes a monograph about it, explaining this strange inscription. Well, Mr. Blotton, who is always the fly in the ointment, goes out here to this village and finds the man that Pickwick bought the stone from, and he says, I want to know about that stone. He said, is it really, really old? He says, yeah, I tell you how old it is. But the inscription, I put the inscription on it. Oh, really? What does it say? Well, now bear in mind, this is a man who is almost literate. It says, Bill stumps his mark. There's his mark right there. Pickwick decides that he wants to hire Sam Weller. He needs a manservant. And he needs to talk to his landlady, Mrs. Bardell. And so he asked her, well, I want your opinion. What do you think? You think it takes a lot more money for to keep two people than to keep one? Whoa! Law, Mr. Pickwick! Law, Mr. Pickwick, what a question. Poor Pickwick. Well, do you? That depends. That depends a great deal upon the person, you know, Mr. Pickwick, and whether it's a saving and careful person, sir. Well, that's true, but the person I have in my eye, he looked very hard at Mrs. Bardell. I think possesses these qualities and has, moreover, a considerable knowledge of the world and a great deal of sharpness, Mrs. Bardell, which may be of material use to me. La, Mr. Pickwick. There are ramifications from this. Oh, she faints. She faints. Just as Tupman and Winkle and Snodgrass arrive, and they find her unconscious in Mr. Pickwick's arms. Well, they go out on their travels. They visit in Eatanswill. There's an election going on. Two parties. They call themselves the Blues and the Buffs, blue and yellow. You know, we've got blue and red states. Nothing changes. It's absolutely partisan. Pickwick is invited to a fancy dress ball by Mrs. Leo Hunter, who collects celebrities. And here Pickwick meets a famous German traveler, a travel writer, Count Smorltork, who is in England gathering materials for a travel book. Have you been here long? Yes, a fortnight. Oh, you're going to be much longer? Yeah, one more week. And I'll have enough to write my big volume on England. And whatever he's told, he gets it muddled. He gets it wrong. Pickwick's name, he says, the big wig lawyer, you know, in the law courts. No. Pickwick. Oh, I know, oh no. Peak Christian name, Weeks. Family name. Yeah. And you know, whatever he writes about England is going to be muddled. Oh, poor Pickwick. He runs into Jingle there. And Jingle now has a sidekick, Job Trotter. And Job feeds this tall tale that he wants to get away. He doesn't want to be involved with Jingle. And Jingle is about to elope with a lady, a young woman, in a school, finishing school. And Pickwick is lured there to wait in the garden to apprehend Jingle. It's all a trap. And poor Pickwick is caught out in the garden. Here are all the ladies coming out with the curling papers in their hair in the middle of the night. Later at Dingley Dell, Mr. Pickwick is suffering from gout, and a shooting party is going out, and he's having trouble walking, and so he's carried in a wheelbarrow, and he's had a couple of glasses of wine for lunch, and the party goes on, and they leave him, and they neglected to understand where they were, and they were on somebody else's property. And so the landowner puts Mr. Pickwick in, this is called a pound, and the people on the estate pelt him with rotten vegetables. Mrs. Bardell brings suit, breach of promise. Here's Pickwick in the law office of the loathsome Dodson and Fogg, who are handling the suit against him. This is another embarrassing situation. Pickwick meets a man who is on his way to propose to a lady. They're sharing a carriage, and Pickwick says he's on his way to expose somebody who is a terrible person. And of course, Pickwick's talking about Jingle. Well, in this hotel, Pickwick realizes in the middle of the night he's left his watch down in the lobby, and he goes and fetches it, and goes back to his room, and he's lost, and he goes in the wrong room. He gets in bed, and suddenly a lady appears. It's her room, and there he is. And the next day, in the breakfast room, she sees Pickwick, the gentleman who's come down to propose to her. She's taken aback, and he thinks that she's the one Pickwick has come to expose. She thinks there's going to be a duel. She goes to the authorities, and Pickwick is arrested. And Sam tries to rescue him, and there's a brawl here. There's a lovely scene, Christmas at Dingley Dell. I wanted to mention this because Mr. Wardle sings a song that he calls A Christmas Carol. And then we've got another of those interpolated tales about a church sexton who is kidnapped by the goblins and taken down into the goblin world because he doesn't like people. And it's Christmas time, and he gets into the spirit. He's a new man. Well, here you see all the elements, including the title, for the most famous of Dickens' Christmas stories. Yeah, there's Daniel Grubb, the churchman, with the goblins. The Pickwickens are out skating on the pond. Of course, Wardle, the sportsman who knows how to do everything, with the help of Sam, gets sort of across the water. Mr. Pickwick can skate tolerably until he falls through the ice. Just his hat is floating there, but he pops up again. He's okay. We meet Sam's father, Tony Weller, who is unhappily married. his first wife died, and he's married a widow, and he keeps he keeps telling Sam, "Don't have anything to do with widows." Well, Sam is at an inn. He's ordered some paper and ink, and he's writing. Tony wants to know, what are you doing? I've been a writer. Well, so I see it. Not any young woman, I hope. Sammy, it's no use of saying it ain't. It's a Valentine. A what? Which Mr. Weller apparently heart restricted. A Valentine. After we get through here, I've got some Dickens collectible stuff up here on the skirt of the stage. Here's Toby mugs with Toby Weller on them. Oh, some of his sayings. Take example by your father, my boy, and be very careful of widders all your life. If you're trying to marry a widder, poison yourself. Hanging is vulgar. Poison yourself. I took a good deal of pains with his education, sir. Let him run in the streets when he was very young and shift for himself. It's the only way to make a boy sharp, sir. Well, of course, it makes him streetwise, doesn't it? Well, the trial comes up, and the evidence is presented. Here's the principal evidence against Pickwick. 2 letters. The attorney for Mrs. Bardell is presenting the case. Now, okay, gentlemen of the jury, here's the first of these. Chops. Gracious heavens. And tomato sauce, gentlemen, is the happiness of a sensitive and confiding female to be trifled away by such shallow artifices as these? And the next one has no date whatever, which is in itself suspicious. The warming pan. Why, gentlemen, who does trouble himself about a warming pan? Why is Mrs. Bardell so earnestly entreated not to agitate herself about this warming pan, unless, as is no doubt the case, it is a mere cover for hidden fire, a mere substitute for some endearing word or promise, agreeably to a preconcerted system of correspondence? And what does this allusion to the slow coach mean? For all I know, it may be a reference to Pickwick himself, who has most unquestionably been a criminally slow coach during the whole of this transaction. Well, the jury is swayed. Mrs. Bardell is awarded £750 in damages, and Pickwick says, "No way, I'm not paying." So he's got some time before he's to settle. They take a trip to Bath, and you see all the pretension, the phoniness. You've seen, I'm sure, a lot of that in Jane Austen. She has a number of scenes set in Bath. It's kind of a meat market. Mothers bring their daughters there trying to find husbands. And then there was another crisis, May 7th. Dickens and Catherine's sister, Mary had come to live with them when they married. This was really pretty common at the time. They'd been to the theater one night. They came home, and Mary was taken ill. Beautiful 17-year-old girl, and she died. When you go to the Dickens House Museum on Doughty Street in London, the very room in which she died is labeled there. Died in Dickens' arms, and he was devastated. She represented to him the ideal of innocence, of beauty, of purity, and she became the model for Little Nell in The Old Curiosity Shop, for Rose Maylie in Oliver Twist, for Kate, Nicholas Nickleby's sister, for Agnes in David Copperfield, and less than a year later, when Dickens' first daughter was born, he named her Mary. He took care of the funeral arrangements, wrote the epitaph, young, beautiful, and good. God in his mercy numbered her among his angels. You can see there's an installment for every month except May 1837. Dickens was so devastated he could not write the part for Pickwick that month, could not write the part for Oliver Twist. He just had to take some time off. Pickwick won't pay. He's sent to prison, not the Marshalsea, but the King's Bench prison. And he finds Jingle there, Jingle and Job, and they're at the end of their line, and they see the error of their ways. And he sees Mrs. Bardell in the prison. Well, he didn't pay the $750 damages, and so she could not pay Dodson and Fogg, the lawyers, their cut, 30%, I don't know how much it was, and so they had her put in jail. Dickens loathed lawyers. Oh, there's a wonderful scene when Mrs. Bardell was arrested. On our London tour, we didn't go to the Spaniards, did we? That was our Sunday walk when it was raining and cold. Okay. At the north end of Hampstead Heath, Jane and Liz and Barbara and Sherry all went with us in 2012. One of the Emeritus College tours. We spent a week in England visiting Dickens sites. Mrs. Bardell was having tea at the Spaniards, and she was arrested and taken to the prison. This is what it looked like, probably in Dickens' time. Here it is today. There's a toll house right here. This is a major street in North London. It narrows down to one lane. The municipal authorities wanted to demolish the old toll house. The Brits are not going to let go of their heritage. You know, we get a building that's 30 years old, we drive a bulldozer through it. The British cherish their heritage. And they said, well, okay, we'll move it back so we can broaden it. Nope. So when you're driving along here, if there's somebody coming, you wait until the way is clear and then you go. Oh, it's wonderful. Winkle has married, and he's done it without his father's permission. And Winkle comes and begs forgiveness of his father, and he brings his beautiful wife, Arabella. Tony Weller's wife has been under the influence of a preacher. He calls himself the shepherd or the good shepherd. And today, I suspect he would be the kind of televangelist who lives in a $6 million mansion and has a stable of Rolls Royces and a private jet and all that. After Tony's wife, his second wife, dies, he kicks Mr. Stiggins, this preacher, out, dunks him in a horse trough. And so Dickens ties the plot up in a very neat package. We already know about Winkle being reconciled with his father. He closes down the Pickwick Club. He pays the damages so Mrs. Bardell can get out of jail. He takes a house and he hires, there's a maid named Mary that they met along the way, and Sam has been courting her. He hires Mary as his housekeeper, and Sam marries her. Snodgrass marries one of Mr. World's daughters. Winkle, there's so much to this novel, subplots and subplots. There's this beautiful girl named Arabella Allen that Winkle marries. Tupman, the lover, never marries. And Tony Weller, his wife had an insurance policy, and he gets Mr. Pickwick to advise him on investments, and he retires. And Jingle and Job Trotter go to the New World and they become productive, upright citizens. Okay. And I love Mr. Pickwick's final word. Dolores, you might consider putting that on my tombstone. Dickens went on to write 14 more novels, all of them serialized, about half of them published in magazines, the other half, like Pickwick, as it's called Part Issue, that monthly little pamphlet. But halfway through the last one, The Mystery of Edwin Drood in 1870, it was different. It was projected to be 12 parts. Dickens had published 3 of the parts, and for one of the only times I know of, he was 3 parts ahead when he died. And so we've got exactly one half of the novel, and Edwin Drood has disappeared. He's a young man, and his uncle is choir master in Cloisterham Cathedral, that's Rochester Cathedral. And we don't know. Has he been murdered? Is he hiding? We don't know. There have been, I know of 24 completions to this novel. It's intriguing. It's the ultimate whodunit because we don't even know what was done. So, here's some things. Dickens was an innovator. Until Dickens published the Pickwick Papers, some books were being published in serial parts, but they were reprints. And there were things like encyclopedias and the Bible and that were sold as parts. But for the publication of new fiction, this is something new in the world, except recently somebody's turned up, somebody who did a very obscure novel. I still think Dickens ought to have the credit. Is the Pickwick Papers a novel? Well, read it and see, because it doesn't start out to be a novel, but it eventually develops a plot. And I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, it is. Did Dickens intend to become a novelist? Well, he had a whole lot of career paths open to him. When he was about 19 or so, he was very interested in the stage all of his life. From the time he was a little child, his dad took him to the theater. He loved the theater. He had an audition scheduled, and the time came, he had a sore throat, he had to cancel it. I think if he had gone into the theater, he would have been one of the brilliant actors of the 19th century. Later in life, he did public readings from his works, and it was profound, the power that he had there. This is another presentation, another time. Is he the greatest English novelist? You know, sometimes I want to say yes, and then I reread Jane Eyre, and I reread Emily Bronte. Okay, he's in the top 3 or 4. 898 characters who actually have names in his novels. That is just, it's mind-blowing. So, now, thank you. Now, I gave you a flyer. It's about something I want you to know about. Dolores and I, back in 1988, established a branch of the Dickens Fellowship, and there's information about it on this sheet that you have in front of you. You could call it a literary society, but that sounds pretentious. It's not that. It's kind of a book club, except there's just one author whose books we read. It's a mixed group. We've got all kinds of people. We're meeting once a month. We follow the academic calendar, September through May. We vacation in the summer. 7 o'clock, the third Tuesday of each week, at the Center for Visual Arts. And here are a couple of email addresses, and there's my phone number. If you're interested at all, send me an email, give me a call. We'd love for you to come visit and see what we do. We've got a handful of members here today. And it may be that you'd like it and you would join us. And and it is always a pleasure. I think we've got a couple of minutes, yes, for questions.
Well, as you mentioned, Charles didn't have very much formal education. Shakespeare didn't have very much formal
Okay, yeah.
And yet they had such vocabulary.
Okay.
How did that happen?
Okay, the question is the lack of formal education. The total number of years that he's had would be what? Equivalent of our elementary school. He read. He was a voracious reader. From the time he learned to read, he read and he read and he read. It's the best kind of education. If you talk to somebody from England about university, you ask, what'd you major in? They don't know what you're talking about. Oh, they say, oh, I read English, I read political science, and that's what they do. They have a tutor that they meet with. There are lectures that they go to, and my friends say, well, occasionally I go to a lecture, but it is with their tutor who sets the readings, and then they meet probably once a week in a seminar, and the students present they've written a paper, they present it, they discuss it, it's reading. There's no substitute. Yes?
I have reasonable vocabulary, but there were a number of words there, and so I didn't look them all up.
Oh.
My question is, did he invent any of those, or are you familiar with all those words?
Yeah. I don't look at the specific words, but my main boss would say, yeah, these are words you find in
There
the
were some
English
that,
dictionary.
yeah.
Okay? Any other questions?
We've got to get out of
Well, yes, what I wanted to say is that I love coming here to have a room full of folks who are here because they want to learn something. Is for a teacher the greatest treat you can imagine. In my 40 years of teaching at North Texas, sometimes not everybody in the room was there to learn.